On Wednesday, Senator Joe Manchin agreed to a deal on a spending package. Now, the plan would address health care, prescription drugs, and climate change. President Biden apparently approves of the roughly $500 billion deal that checks off some of the Democratic priorities, but does it go far enough? Here to help break this down is Dayen, the executive editor at the American Prospect. Great to have you with us.
Thanks for having me.
So what is your opinion of this bill? Does it go far enough?
Well, I mean, compared to where we were 24 hours ago, it goes a lot further. The expectation was we were just going to pass some kind of modest prescription drug reform and then extend subsidies for the Affordable Care Act to the insurance exchanges. And all of a sudden, Manchin comes in and says, I'm back on board with a climate package that, the word gets thrown around, the phrase, kind of the most historic fight against climate in American history is true. But I mean, the bar is quite low for that. And then it's funded by increases in taxes. And this is something that was thought to be off the table. And I think it's, while obviously not where we were initially last year when Joe Biden was putting out his American Families Plan and American Jobs plans, it's significant. And it's something that should make a dent in carbon emissions. It should bring a pretty modest but significant measure of fairness to the tax system, and it should be an advance on healthcare.
So, to what do you attribute this sudden ninth inning shift?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk to Manchin, he'd say he didn't shift at all. But 2 weeks ago, we had this spate of reports that he walked away, that he didn't want to talk about any tax increases or any climate measures. And then kind of everybody pointed to him as the man who took this down and the man who burned the planet. And I think the fact that came from all sides, not just activists, was important. That Joe Manchin cares about being trashed on the New York Times op-ed page. He cares about being singled out as the one person who stopped this.
And he's been singled out so much for the last several years.
But that was by activists. This was by everybody.
So you're telling me, David, you're telling me that if the Democratic Party, who's been claiming that Manchin hasn't been holding up the entire Joe Biden agenda, that this has been Joe Manchin's presidency, that if the Democratic Party establishment had simply joined activists to put pressure on Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema this whole time, we could have had Joe Biden's entire Build Back Better agenda?
I'm not saying that. You're able to say that. Joe Manchin was always going to be a tough case here, right? He was always going to contour this to whatever beliefs that he had. I think at the end, he wanted to be protected. He would much rather, if the stories were Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema did X, or Joe Manchin and Josh Gottheimer did X, that would have been easier for him. But it was all about him in that moment. And so he came back, and then of course, I don't know exactly when this was agreed to, but certainly the announcement was delayed for maximum effect. So there was this other bill on semiconductor manufacturing that Republicans shared votes on. This was yesterday in the Senate. That 17 Republicans voted for this bill that was a priority of Biden's. And earlier, Mitch McConnell had said, if you go forward with reconciliation, we're going to hold this bill hostage. We're not going to pass this bill. And so, Manchin blows up and walks away. And the expectation is that that's dead. And McConnell relents and allows the Republicans to go forward and cooperate on that bill. And 4 hours after it passes in the Senate, Manchin announces that there's a deal. I mean, this is almost the opposite of what you would expect if you're talking about the posture of Democrats and Republicans typically. The Machiavellian one, it seems, in this case, was Schumer, who waited until Republicans had cooperated to announce the deal. And McConnell looks like the guileless one. I mean, as I wrote in my story today, if you told me like a cosmic ray hit Washington and flipped everybody's brains, giving Schumer the cunning of a Republican and McConnell the guilelessness of a Democrat, that would be a more plausible explanation than the truth.
Well, let's talk about some of the specifics here, because I've seen some mixed reviews. I think Democrats have been hurt, leftists have been hurt, and they are skeptical about this, in part because the scale is so much smaller than the original proposals that Biden came into all of this with. But also because they broadly are skeptical of a party that they perceive as being largely in bed with the fossil fuel industry, and that Joe Manchin is not atypical with respect to the broader attitudes toward a transition to clean energy. So I saw, Peter Kalmus, who's a NASA climate scientist and a climate activist, tweeting, surprise deal, $369 billion over 10 years for, quote, energy climate programs, financed, as you pointed out, by taxes on the rich. Great. We need details on these programs. Will they be for fossil gas and other boondoggles? And also able to recognize that this is only still 4.6% of the military budget. So for scale there, this is the crucial question that climate scientists are asking. Even if this is an improvement on the mean, is this the level of investment in climate that actually can keep us from getting to the tipping points that spell even more of a cataclysmic climate shift than the one we've already earned with our inaction?
Sure. So the claim is that the bill would reduce carbon emissions by 40% by 2030. That's about 80% of the Biden climate goals. This is not 80% of the funding that we saw in the initial Build Back Better package. That was at $550 billion in investment. This is 369, and that includes some level, it's a little bit indeterminate what, of funding for things like biofuel production and offshore oil and fossil fuel production, as long as it has carbon capture on it. This is obviously the way that Democrats were able to get Manchin's buy-in. You're sustaining carbon emissions and hopefully slightly cleaner ones right now in exchange for a green transition. There is also what is called a climate bank in there. It's funded at $27 billion. That's supposed to attract private investment and level up. So the claim is that you're ending up getting more bang for your buck because you're bringing the private sector in to finance some clean energy projects. So, it's I would like to see some independent climate modeling of this bill. The claim, there was a claim, for example, in the infrastructure bill that we were going to fix all the lead water pipes in the country, even though the investment was less than half what it was in the initial envisioning, which was supposed to fix all the lead water pipes in the country. So there's a bit of a do more with less here, but people that I respect point to a lot of really good things in the bill. There is a $7,500 tax credit given at the point of sale for electric vehicles, for example. There's $60 billion in environmental justice funding in the bill. There's grants to utilities to decarbonize, including direct pay credits for public power facilities. So there's a lot to like here.
I mean, people have criticized those credits for electric vehicles for largely being kind of regressive. The vehicles are so expensive that even $7,000 off is going to people who would already be able to afford these more expensive vehicles.
Well, and then it's giving credit to our elite class to talk about, we don't care about high gas prices because you should just be able to get an electric vehicle.
And it benefits the manufacturers as well.
There's also a $4,500 credit for used electric vehicles, and that is targeted at people who make less than $7,500 a year. So the hope of this bill is to bring that electric vehicle down the chain, so it is more affordable for people who have a more modest budget. That's the attempt anyway. There certainly is more put towards the transportation sector and electrifying the transportation sector than there is towards, say, walkability or mass transit. Of course, that was in the infrastructure bill. But there's going to be a lot of need for sprawl and roads because what you're boosting here is vehicle transportation.
Before we wrap, I just wanted to quickly get the specifics on what's going on with the prescription drugs, because I know that's front and center in a lot of people's minds. What can they expect to feel differently going forward in that area?
I mean, if they're not a senior, not a whole lot. This is very much targeted towards Medicare. Initially, the vision was that the negotiation of prices through Medicare would also be available to private payers, which means that patients who weren't 65 and older would get the benefit. That is no longer the case. It's really only 10 drugs, and that starts in 2026. There are out-of-pocket caps for seniors, and there are some other benefits, free vaccines and things like that. But this is largely targeted at public programs and specifically Medicare. The one thing that I think should be done is this gets a little complicated, but there's a separate bill about insulin, right? And insulin is kind of a signature failure of the current pharmaceutical system. It's been off patent for like 100 years, and yet it still triples in price. Because there's that separate bill, insulin measures that were, and that included a copay cap of $35 a month, those measures were in the Build Back Better bill on the House side. They were taken out because they're in this separate bill that's bipartisan, and Manchin wanted to see that bipartisanship flourish, even though it doesn't have 10 votes. It does not have 10 Republican votes. There's no way it's going to pass. So I would like to see the insulin measures put back into this bill. And a lot of organizing has been done around that. I don't know if it's going to happen, but that's an area where you could extend that to Medicaid, you could extend that to TRICARE, and you could get a lot more people who benefit from this bill rather than just seniors.
Well, thank you for those clarifications, David. We will continue to be following this, obviously.
All right.
And we will have more Rising for you coming up after this.